and community with forward-thinking and proactive policies and actions. Our concerns are not just with ocean life, but with the watersheds above it and the entire community of plants, animals, and people that inhabit and enjoy this area and the ocean, which is why the Sea Ranch Lodge is very happy to sponsor this year's Ocean Life Symposium. And this is KGUA in Gualala 88.3 FM. It is the first day of the third annual Ocean Life Symposium for 3 hours each day this week from 9 a.m. to noon. 19 local and national ocean experts and citizen scientists will talk about their health and the future of our oceans and the life forms within them. Our studios are located on the Pacific Ocean on the South Mendocino coast in Gualala, California. And the sponsors are the Sea Ranch Lodge, Linden Design Gallery, Lisberg and Company Realtors, the Sea Ranch Supply, and CNA Metalworks. I'm one of your hosts and the co-producer, Leanne Lindsay, along with co-producers and Ocean Life founders, Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, and KGUA host George Callis, Paul Mundy, and Peggy Berryhill. You can listen live online at kgua.org. Just click listen live at the top of the page or use apps Radio Garden or TuneIn. Best of all, though, you can watch all the presentations live or later at your leisure on YouTube, and we are live on YouTube now. There is an interactive speaker schedule at kgua.org. Just click on the schedule link at the top of the page and you'll see background info and the topics of each speaker. And if you're using our Air Pocket app by Radio Rethink and Spinatron, then the Ocean Life interactive schedule is there for you at any time. Just click listen live to get the app. And now, before though we get into our first day and our first speaker, we do have an important announcement about the weather that's been happening along our Northern California coast. Peggy Berryhill.
Thank you, Leanne. And we are so happy. I just want to reiterate how proud KGUA is to work with the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study for this 3-day symposium. Just a quick note, as you all know, we had some fairly good rain yesterday. The Padaha River is still closed. You cannot go to or from Point Arena at this point or further north. So just beware that you are cannot travel far and watch the roads. We understand there may be another system coming in, and it one weathercaster tells you it's going to be mild, another weathercaster tells you it's going to be strong. I don't think we had that weather bomb thing that they were saying we're having, but we had a lot of rain. So we've had over 11 inches of rain in 2 days.
Some places in Santa Rosa were affected more than we were.
Oh my goodness, all over the place. The highway was closed in many areas. So up here, we're doing pretty good. And you all found out whether your drains were working or not. And so we're prepared and we're happy as can be to have this rain. So I'm going to get out of your way. I'm going to turn this over to George Callis. And I also want to remind you, KGUA riders, of course, you're not on right now, obviously. We're going to have an encore KGUA riders at 1 o'clock. So that will be at 1 o'clock. But the Ocean Symposium is Monday through Friday, 9 until 12, live here on KGUA. And we're now going to toss you to our friend George Callis, the editor of Soundings and one of our new interviewers on Peggy's Place. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Our first speaker today is Richard Charter. Richard's a senior fellow at the Ocean Foundation. Today, he's going to speak about climate chaos as an excuse for further destruction of our environment. For over 4 decades, Richard Charter has worked to ensure protection for fragile marine ecosystems and many of our sensitive coastlines. He was integral in establishing a moratorium on offshore drilling. He worked to support the creation and expansion of many of our national marine sanctuaries. Why don't you join me in welcoming Richard Charter?
Thank you. Today, as we gather virtually to celebrate our oceans, we are reminded that 50 years ago, ordinary coastal citizens right here in California, particularly on the Mendocino Sonoma coast, joined with their local elected officials and stopped a federal offshore oil and gas lease sale called Sale 53, igniting what has now become a global movement to protect coastal waters from industrialization and petroleum contamination, such as that which is still washing ashore as tar balls from Huntington Beach to La Jolla. Were it not for our coastal activism, what we are now seeing along the coast of Orange County could easily have been taking place right here, right now, as a result of a proposed subsea oil pipeline extending from the Point Arena offshore basin to the planned oil processing facility that targeted the little village, believe it or not, of Manchester on the Mendocino coast during the same era. Recognizing that carbon pumped out of the seabed to wind up in the atmosphere would damage our climate, it has taken the intervening half century and a series of wildfires, superstorms, and ecological catastrophes to convince the powers that be in our society that we need to change how our society obtains and uses the raw materials of virtually every industry and then disposes of the waste. Now, as we shift to new ways, to trying to be easier on the planet and lighter on the land, we need to apply the precautionary principle to ensure that even our efforts to secure a better future do not themselves cause further, often unforeseeable damage to the web of life on which we all depend. So today I will provide a couple of quick snapshots, examples from different disciplines of the steps we need to take to avoid allowing climate panic to mislead us in our quest for a better and more compatible way to live here gracefully and with respect for our fellow inhabitants of this global ecosystem. Midway between Bodega Bay and Jenner on the Sonoma coast is a spectacular piece of land called the Scotty Creek Valley. It is totally unique. It has two different kinds of protected wetlands. We recognized very early in the process of creating our local coastal program here in Sonoma County after the Coastal Act came into effect. We'd realized that this place was unique and made it a particularly specially designated what is called a scenic landscape unit. As of last week, this place was virtually totally destroyed. In spite of its protection, in spite of the layers of officialdom that had said they were going to protect it. And I think there's an example and a warning here, a cautionary note for other people along the coast who look at parts of Highway 1. This came about because a long time ago, before there was a planning department in Sonoma County at all, and because there was no subdivision map act, some agricultural landowner decided that between Highway 1 and the ocean, they could subdivide the land into a series of lots. And those lots at the time they were sold were crumbling into the ocean. And they have since crumbled into the ocean even more. And as a result, that attracted the attention of Caltrans, who said, we need to relocate Coast Highway 1. Instead of just moving it a little ways inland, they decided they needed a bridge similar to what one would find in the middle of San Jose to cross a little 8-foot stream, which I've been watching since about 1956, which has never gone over the road. And so today we are facing a model, it's being called. About 100 officials met there on this site just last week and hailed it as a model for adapting to climate change on the California coast. I would suggest that it is anything but a model, and we're going to have to get better at learning how to make compatible projects fit into what's already here. We have seen models before that worked when Highway 280 was built through the Portola Valley, south of San Francisco, down to Los Gatos. A landscape architect named Lawrence Halperin was retained to design every element of that feature so that it would fit into the landscape. And there's a world famous example called the Paris-Lexington Road in the EU, where fitting into what exists on our coastline is going to be increasingly important as we address sea level rise. This is not going to be easy, and we also are facing at the same time a shift in where and how we obtain energy, particularly electrical energy. So the physics of extraction of mechanical energy from a real-time planetary system, such as offshore floating wind, rather than from stored hydrocarbons that were put off the coast long ago, is not a great mystery. There have been wind generators for decades and electric cars. My father drove one when like the 1930s. Amy Lovins told us a few decades ago that we were going to move to renewable energy, and it would be combined with energy efficiency and painless energy conservation. The efficiency and conservation part has been forgotten as our society, particularly the current administration, both in Washington and Sacramento, moves forward to harvest offshore wind energy off the Humboldt County coast and off of the Morro Bay, southern Big Sur region. What is being harvested is very interesting because it's the wind that drives our coastal upwelling system. Our upwelling system, where the wind blows over coastal waters, the surface waters move offshore, and cold, nutrient-rich water moves toward the surface. The density of energy available as wind energy is only found in certain areas. It is found off of Cape Mendocino, off of Humboldt County, and off of Del Norte County, and along the Oregon coast in Northern California. In Southern California, because they are not going to target national marine sanctuaries for offshore wind, the targets are primarily Morro Bay and up to about Cambria, and with cables coming ashore at Diablo Canyon. So the targets for floating offshore wind are limited. The impacts are more complicated than most people are given to understand, because each floating turbine is connected to the seafloor with 3 to 5 cables that anchor it to very large concrete anchors on the seafloor. And then each turbine is connected to the next turbine with a draped cable carrying electricity to an offshore substation, and then to a subsea cable that comes to a power station on shore. This is a whole industrial infrastructure on a part of the California coast, both Humboldt and Morro Bay, that has not been targeted for any kind of industrialization before. The primary lessees, the companies expressing the most interest in floating offshore wind off California, the big companies are Shell, who happens to have installed the pipeline that just leaked oil off of Orange County, BP, who of course had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and a company called Equinor, which until a couple of years ago was called Statoil, also one of the largest offshore oil and gas development companies on the planet. So offshore oil drillers are shifting to floating offshore wind and anticipating gathering from the federal government federal offshore leases to harvest offshore wind, and from the state government in state waters off of Vandenberg, state leases to harvest floating offshore wind. This is not something we can stop. There are some well-paid consultants giving to saying, yes, there will be no problem. But we need to pay very close attention to some of the details of how this is going to work and what the impacts will be on our marine environment. Obviously, our fishing industry here, a sustainable artisanal fishery, is very concerned about loss of some of their prime fishing grounds. There are biological hotspots associated with, the upwelling system that is characterized by this targeting to gather the highest wind energy density. There are lights on the floating wind arrays that attract certain species of seabirds, which then fly in circles and die on the deck. We know that from offshore drilling rigs. And there are electromagnetic fields that, combined with very loud noises, are going to probably create some complications for whale migration along this coast. We don't know the exact nature of those complications, but we do know that when you add up the number of turbines that are being planned, for example, off of Humboldt County, and the number of cables draped to the seafloor and between the turbines, it starts looking like a chain link fence for whales. So we need to learn who to trust in this process, and not just accept don't worry, be happy answers from this industry, even though we know that we aren't going to stop it. We're not trying to stop it. And we need to be careful that we don't wind up driving electric cars with batteries obtained by strip mining the ocean for lithium, or driving on overscaled highways torn through our most sensitive and long protected coastal wetlands, as we watch the coast of Humboldt and Big Sur be blighted by massive industrial parks and the deep ocean in other parts of the planet strip mined for lithium for the batteries. These are choices we're facing right now. There are public comment periods open among many of these public agencies that are letting leases in these areas. So I encourage the public who has saved this coast before from everything from a nuclear reactor at Bodega Head to the dredging of Petty Island at Jenner to offshore drilling along this entire coast. It's up to the people who live here, I would say. That's who saved it last time. And finally, I'd like to touch on the most counterintuitive plan of 1998, which is still around in 2021. And that its proposals to drop 1.5 tons of contraceptive a 1.5 tons of anticoagulant ecosystem poison to sterilize the Southeast Farallon Islands. This plan is a little bit hard to understand. It's in the most protected piece of ocean on the planet. It's in the middle of our National Marine Sanctuary. It is surrounded by 2 state marine protected areas that were created by the Marine Life Protection Act. And it's in the middle of some very critical crab fishing grounds. But the idea is that in this most protected area on the planet, we have a problem. And that problem is 10 or 12, nobody's sure, burrowing owls, a protected species which migrates from the coast of Marin out to the Farallon Islands, attracted by a bloom each fall of introduced mice that either wound up there when the Russians were hunting for sea otters along this coast, might have come ashore then, might have come ashore in the 1500s when the first explorers came ashore on the Farallones. But these mice attract burrowing owls, which come to the island to eat mice. The mouse population crashes rather precipitously. And when the mice disappear, the burrowing owls stick around and sometimes predate on the eggs and chicks of an iconic seabird called the ashy storm petrel. Ironically, the ashy storm petrel is actually one of the birds that would be most threatened by floating offshore wind and the lights if the lighting isn't done right. So the plan is that anticoagulant rodenticides, which are not too popular these days and which have been outlawed in the local coastal plan of the Santa Monica Mountains of Malibu, soon to be Ventura County, and the state of California passed AB 1178, prohibiting their use under most circumstances in the state of California on land. State of Massachusetts is doing the same thing right about now, as is the province of British Columbia, and 17 communities in British Columbia that are tired of watching their owls fall dead on their front lawns as a result of inadvertent exposure to these chemicals. This is what is targeting the Farallones right now. The locality could not be more sensitive. The density of wildlife on it, both marine mammals and seabirds, could not be more important biologically planet-wide. The Fish and Wildlife Service, who's behind the plan, says, well, if we only kill a little over 1,000 Western gulls, they will recover their population within 20 years, which doesn't sound like a particularly good rationale to me. You have ground zero for the biology ground zero for an ecosystem poison that is well known to kill more than just the mice. In fact, it has to kill everything on the island, and then other animals are gradually brought back to hopefully wind up with a mouse-free island, although this chemical on other islands has failed to eliminate mice fully 38% of the time. The way it kills animals is slow, 2 to 3 weeks of internal bleeding. It is inhumane by any standard. Not so much worrying about the mice, they're not supposed to be there anyway, but certainly raptors that feed on poisonous mice, gulls that feed on poisoned seagulls, poisoned mice, gulls that migrate to the mainland. This is basically a carpet bombing with a poison that kills everything. These birds aren't going to all die on the Farallones, what are called incidental bykill, a word that I don't care for, but that's what they call it. There will be raptors from the mainland, there will be gulls from the mainland, and gulls from the mainland could wind up dying, staggering around on Fisherman's Wharf or the waterfront in San Francisco, impressing tourists as they die slowly. So this is something that is coming before the California Coast Commission this December, we now understand. Today, Joe Biden named a new head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's taking him a while to get around to naming a director for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Her name is Martha Williams. We're not quite sure where she is going to come down on this particular proposal. It's been getting more and more controversial, obviously, over the years. I'm sure a lot of folks in this listenership have been following it. And we need to start thinking about changing our policies because we face changed circumstances. The poison drop on the Farallones, believe it or not, is being rationalized as a way to combat climate change. Climate change is becoming the catch-all word for anything that anybody comes up with as a great idea. And on the Farallones, I don't quite understand how it became connected to climate change, but against that backdrop, communities, and as I say, the state of California, the municipalities in British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are all banning the same poison. So we need to watch out for things that are greenwashed, I think is the term that historically has been applied to things like this. Climate change is the new greenwashing. So we, recognizing that this is not a particularly easy scenario to understand, we created a free book, which you can download right now at a website called Poison Free Sanctuary, one word, poisonfreesanctuary.org, Poison Free Sanctuary. And the purpose of this book, it's very short. It's in language anybody can understand. It's also based on sound science. Each page has several links back to the actual peer-reviewed scientific studies on which the book is based. They're live links in the Kindle ebook. So if you go to poisonfreesanctuary.org, you'll be able to download this book, and you'll be able to get a grip on what's going on at the December meeting of the California Coastal Commission to determine whether dropping a deadly ecosystem poison in the middle of our National Marine Sanctuary is a good idea or not. And if you want to be able to send an email right now today to the Coastal Commission, skip the book, you can send an email to Farallon Islands. That's 1 R, 2 L's, Farallon Islands, one word, Farallon Islands at coastal.ca.gov, and just say, stop the drop. Don't do this. I mean, this is something that has been getting hotter and hotter for the last several years. And I think it's time that the public that has protected this coast from so many things for so long protects it once again. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. I thank KGUA and everybody involved for this annual ocean conference. It's a good way to get the latest out to the public, and I am happy to be part of it. And I thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
And thank you. We are so happy to have you this morning, Richard Charter, my friend from Bodega Bay, where I used to live. And Richard, you know, you brought us up to date on so many of the projects you are working on. And, you know, you started by saving us from a nuclear power plant in Bodega Bay, now known as the Hole in the Head. So Richard's been at this for a very, very long time. And I have one quick question. How are your efforts being met in Washington, D.C. these days?
It depends on which issue. In terms of stopping offshore drilling, which, as I say, began right here on the Sonoma Mendocino coast a long time ago, because we had in the Bring Back Better legislation, the Budget Reconciliation Act, we had a ban, permanent ban on new offshore oil and gas leasing affecting the entire Pacific coast, California, Oregon, Washington. That is still in the bill, to my knowledge, at this moment. The oil industry was lobbying to have that removed from the bill. However, they had a little problem off of Orange County at a very bad time, in front of a county that will obviously have a lot to do with determining, for example, the partisan leadership of the next House of Representatives, as well as a lot of other things. So we think we might get that.
Great. Well, that's, you know, sad news for Los Angeles, but good news for all of us in our battles that face us in this climate change we're in climate change. And I think, the other question that I have before we go on is, what about climate change deniers? Are we up against some of those in Congress as well?
Well, we're up against almost anything that could possibly be believed in Congress. There are anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, anti-climate and climate deniers. And I have come to believe in my lifetime working with the US Congress that it's not a matter of if there are people who believe contrary to the public, they won't last long. The public leads in America. I believe in democracy. I don't worry too much about them. The thing is to the question in Congress is always just like in a local board of supervisors. Do we have the votes? And I think on climate in the White House and in the Congress, it's there. We're there.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. And I love ending on those words about the people leading. And that's exactly what we all have to do. This is Peggy Berryhill at KGUA in Gualala, and saying momentarily farewell to our friend Richard Charter from Bodega Bay, who works tirelessly on all of our behalf. Leanne Lindsay is with me, and the man in black, George Callis, is with us as well from the Sea Ranch, another one of our local voices here. So if you have questions or comments on any speaker, you can go to Ocean Life Symposium, all one long word, Ocean Life Symposium @gmail.com. And we will share those with our speakers, and you can find out more about Richard. Just Google him, go to the Ocean Foundation and find out more about Richard, and we'll let you know about all of our other speakers. Thank you, Richard. We're going to say farewell.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Yes, and so if you do have questions, you can email those to oceanlifesymposium@gmail.com. If you want to see the schedule for this whole week of the Ocean Life Symposium, go to kgua.org and click on schedule, and you will see the entire week of speakers. You click through and you can see their backgrounds and their titles of their talks. And this is the first day of the Ocean Life Symposium. You can also listen to us on 88.3 FM along the coast and online at kgua.org. We've got an Air Pocket app in the upper left-hand corner. When you click on Listen Live, you can save that to any digital device, and also on apps for Radio Garden and Tune In. And then we also are live on YouTube, so you can watch now or you can watch later at your leisure. And now we're going to ask George, who's up next.
Thanks, Leanne. What a stimulating presentation from Richard Charter, wasn't that? Our next speaker is Shari Goforth-Eby of the Mendonoma Gray Whale Photo ID Project. Shari moved to the Mendocino coast in 2017, where her interest in whales began. Shari's Mendonoma Gray Whale Photo ID Project is a modest citizen science project where she photographs and catalogs these giants of the coast.
I'm Shari Goforth-Eby, and I live in Gualala, California, and it's indeed an honor to have the opportunity to present my project at the Ocean Life Symposium 2021. My Gray Whale Photo ID project is a humble citizen science adventure where I photograph and document local Eastern Pacific gray whales as often as possible throughout the year. My efforts are an attempt to contribute to the greater understanding and conservation of these amazing creatures. I believe that a single photograph in the right hands can be a document for change. My observations are on the land which has been the home of the Pomo people, the Kashaya band of Pomo, and the Coast Miwok for thousands of years, and I'm honored to be a guest in their homelands. I've geared this presentation towards encouraging others to get involved with photo documentation of our local gray whales since there's been some interest locally. I've included some slides on methods, gear, and data. Thank you for indulging me. I photo document Eastern Pacific gray whales year-round on the rugged southern Mendocino and northern Sonoma County coasts from 3 primary locations and a 4th less frequently. I observed and photographed from essentially 4 local sites, 2 as part of my regular daily observation spots and 2 less frequently. My first preferred site is the Bluff Trail in downtown Gualala, Mendocino County, California. We pronounce it Gualala. Gualala shares the coastline with our neighbors on the Sea Ranch just across the bridge in Sonoma County, and the cove waters are part of the unincorporated area of Sonoma County. We usually see a few gray whales foraging the cove most of spring, summer, and fall, but far less during the winter portion of the southbound migration. For gray whales in Gualala Point Cove this year, the last one on August 2nd was a visitor I call epicenter. My second preferred location is Saunders Reef, the coastal view, mile marker 10.5, which is about 10 miles north on Highway 1. We often see gray whales during all 4 seasons, but of most interest to me are the summer and fall locals who will stay for a few days to a few weeks and some stay longer. Both Gualala and Saunders Reef areas see gray whales foraging in close, that is, within about 600 meters or less. But Saunders is windier, less protected than the Bluff Trail in Gualala. Rough water, high winds, rain, and fog can make it difficult to collect photo data. My third site is the Point Arena Lighthouse in Mendocino County, California. If I'm not seeing gray whales at the other places, I'll drive north to the lighthouse, where I will usually find 2 researchers sitting in camp chairs counting whales. Sometimes gray whales are seen foraging near the closer kelp beds. The Lighthouse Peninsula projects farther west into the Pacific Ocean, and it's even more exposed to severe weather than Saunders Reef, and is also prone to heavy fog. The 4th site is Bodega Head West, Bodega Bay in Sonoma County, California. I photograph passing or foraging gray whales who show up during my volunteer shift with the Seabird Monitoring Program through Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods. As with the other sites, Bodega Head is unprotected and prone to high winds, rough water, and fog. Photo documenting gray whales for identification is not new, and I didn't know of any other projects at the time I started, so I just flailed around and forged ahead. I began observing gray whales in late 2018. I joined a Whale Watch docent program through the Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods in 2019 and began making almost daily observations and notes of gray whales in our area from spring of 2019 on. I began wondering if, of all the gray whales I have observed passing our coast, how could I know whether or not I'm counting the same gray whales more than once? I needed to identify these grays, but I could not make the identifications with binoculars. I would need photos to study their individual markings and IDs for ID purposes. I acquired better photo gear in late summer 2019 and had better success capturing identifying marks on gray whales, but useful images were limited to mid-cove distances or closer. I studied photography at the somewhat esteemed YouTube University School of Photography and adapted camera settings from the expert tutorials of birds in flight. I spent hours in post-processing, cropping, sharpening, adjusting contrast, and trying anything that would yield more useful images of markings. I quickly discovered that I needed better resolution photos. Basically, I shoot tiny specks in the ocean, whales, and I crop hard to enlarge the subject to glean bits of detail. I bought a high resolution, high megapixel camera and upgraded to a longer range lens. It was a steep learning curve, but immediately I began getting better detailed photos of closer whales and very useful photos of gray whales well beyond the Central Cove and Reef. It's important to have support staff. This is my faithful assistant and navigator, Ringo. He doesn't do data entry, he doesn't answer phones, doesn't clean gear, and his navigation skills are limited to pointing out pocket gophers, but he's loyal and shows up for work every day. So who gets photographed? I document gray whales at a distance of around 800 meters or less, or roughly about a half a mile or less from shore. The limits are set by the camera gear. I'm not limited to those geographic distances. If presented with the opportunity, I will photograph gray whales spotted from the boat well offshore, since that would put me in the range for good detailed ID photos. From the bluffs, I generally don't count whales out in deeper water, since they're out of my camera range and therefore too far out to ID. Many of these grays will likely be counted in other surveys. So what do I do with my photos? Identifying gray whales in my photos is an ongoing process. I want to contribute to the greater understanding of these whales, so I've begun submitting my photos to Cascadia Research Collective and Happy Whale, who have sophisticated computer matching software systems. They identify whales, assign them a unique number, and catalog them in a searchable database. Laguna San Ignacio Ecosystem Science Program makes their photo catalogs available online. I use analog photo matching, which just means I sit with my iPad and by hand, sort gray whale photos and screenshots into albums, and scroll through other people's databases looking for matches. My data sheets reflect the bare beginnings of the cross-referencing process, but I have already matched a few of our local gray whales as members of the Pacific Coast Feeding Group. I use a very simple numbering system consisting of my initials, the first year I photographed the whale, and a hyphen followed by a unique number assigned to that individual. My numbering system is more of a holding pattern until a match can be made with Cascadia Research, Happy Whale, or San Ignacio. While also introducing some of the photo documented gray whales, I'd like to explain the terms I use. First, we have visitors. A visitor is any gray whale seen in our local area once, usually without enough data for full documentation or ID. These are gray whales are often on the migration route. It makes sense that we see a lot more one-time visitors during migration since they tend to be focused on their destination and are just passing through. We also have repeaters. A repeater is a gray whale documented 2 or more days, and usually I'll get enough photos of both sides of the dorsal knuckle area and hopefully top and bottom of the flukes to assign an ID. This beauty, I call Ticker, was fully photographed and documented twice in March of 2021 and then not seen here since. Then we have locals. Locals are an offshoot of a repeater. A local is a gray whale observed and photographed, documented multiple times during one season, and I assigned an ID. The label local is also a term I apply to a familiar gray whale, one often with an unscientific amount of affection attached to its presence. This includes one of my favorites, who I call Bridle. Bridle is my most photographed gray whale, documented in our area at least 16 separate occasions from August through November of 2020. But I've not seen Bridle this year yet. Rainier is another gray who I consider to be a local. I photographed Rainier on 12 separate occasions from October through December of 2020, and one additional encounter on March 22nd, 2021. I'm always happy to see this intrepid gray show up with its assortment of orchid tooth rakes and gnaw marks on its dorsal knuckle. I suspect Rainier will move up to resident status, but not just yet. All of the observations occurred in a period of just under 6 months with a 2-month gap. The last sighting occurred in March during the spring migration. So a resident, as of this year, I finally have data to confirm that we have residents. A resident gray whale exhibiting site fidelity who is documented returning to our area and utilizing our resources for 2 or more years. I've identified 3 gray whales who have earned the title of resident. The resident bronze medal goes to Da Dit Da with multiple sightings from July to November and with a documented return in July and August of 2021. The resident silver medal goes to Taillight. Taillight is another gray with multiple sightings in December and October of 2020 and a documented return this year in August. And the resident gold medal goes to Spotlight with 3 years of sight fidelity. I first photographed Spotlight in November of 2018 when he or she was close to the Gualala Point Cove. It was a lucky series of photos. I have a few usable photos for 2019, but very few since my camera gear at the time was limited in resolution and reach. Spotlight returned in August, September, and November of 2020 and has a documented return in July of this year. This summer, 2021. So how do I keep track of these grays and how do I collect my data? Metadata is important. My daily observation metadata logging is done in pencil on a form I designed with spaces for the data I'm interested in. I collect information from several sources, the weather sources depending on the proximity of cell service and Wi-Fi. First source is my personal weather station, which reports to the internet. It's great in areas with Wi-Fi or cell service. Without a connection, I use a weather flow meter, a handheld meter with a large array of data available. It Bluetooths to my cell phone and uploads and stores weather data in the app. It's powerful and reliable. Seawater temperature data comes from the Bodega Ocean Observing Node, about 3/4 of a mile offshore from the Bodega Marine Lab in Bodega Bay, California. I use a Tides app for the up-to-the-minute tidal information, moon phases, and sunrise, sunset. The TimeStep camera app allows me to shoot a weather photo with my camera phone, and the photo is saved with location, GPS coordinates, and date and time. The last app of note is Date Stamper, and it's invaluable for marking photos with time and date derived from the camera's embedded photo information. I use it to find out the date and time of unmarked photos, oftentimes sent to me. It's accurate and it has saved an incredible amount of time compared with marking each of the individual photos by hand as I did in the early days. So let's switch gears for a few minutes and look at some data. Someone once said jokingly, if you don't have charts or tables in your presentation, then it's not science. So here's a partial spreadsheet which functions as a rough graph showing the frequency of observations and totals for 2020, where I spent about 1 to 3 hours or more a day at Gualala Point, Saunders Reef, and to a lesser extent, the Point Arena Lighthouse and Bodega Head West, for a total of 133 observation days. For 2021, I've been logging observation hours also. Like so many others in 2020, my data has a big hole in it due to the shore and beach closures due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here is where I can answer the question, how do you know if you're counting the same gray whale more than once? Every time I observe a gray whale, I log it. For 2020, I observed and counted 255 gray whales. Of those 255, 98 were multiple sightings of previous or newly identified gray whales. Those 98 sightings of identified gray whales boiled down to just 18 individuals. With photo documentation, without the photo documentation for ID, my counts would have been way off. I was, in fact, counting them a lot more than just once. These are 3 examples of pages for my field guides, the gray whale yearbooks, which are assembled by year with whales filed alphabetically by name and cross-referenced to an ID number index. Most current year is always on top. The photos on the left of the page are left lateral views and with the dorsal knuckle as close to center as possible. The right of the page is the right lateral view. Dorsal, the top of the flukes are on the left side of the page, and ventral underside flukes are on the right. Other useful data and views, if available, follow in the remaining slots. The guides often changes due to better or more complete series of identification photos for individual gray whales. Occasionally, with better documentation, 2 gray whales turn out to be a single whale and have to be merged. Or there is what I call retro matching, such as the case with Tortuga in the 3rd photo. Most of Tortuga's best ID photos were shot in the better conditions of January 2021, but when reviewing photos from foggy December 2020, I found Tortuga in some fog-obscured photos. So Tortuga also got a page in 2020 Gray Whale Yearbook. I'd like to dive in here and look at what I find to be some of the most interesting, if not unfortunate, group of gray whales. These are the swimming wounded. In this section, I want to show the gray whales from our local area who exhibit anthropogenic sources, that is human, and natural sources of injury. This is only a list of the injuries I've photographed, but there are so many other types out there. The etiology of each injury is still up for discussion. My hope is that when I submit my block of gray whale photos to Cascadia Research Collective, we'll come up with matches and more information on these grays. At this time, I'd like to show these 9 gray whales as examples of injuries which I've photographed in our area. Wally was a visitor to Saunders Reef in mid-August of this year and is one of the more lucky whales, in my humble opinion, sporting only 2 parallel lacerations consistent with boat propeller injury. Though one is longer and deeper, both appear to be fairly superficial. This is one of the more well-known grays on the Northwest Pacific coast, known as Rambellina, CRC6. First photographed in 1989 in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, she was seen in the Mexican lagoons with a calf in 2008. She has 10 heel propeller lacerations on her left side up through her dorsal knuckle. I photographed her off the Point Arena Lighthouse in July of 2020, and she was reportedly sighted off the bluffs of the town of Mendocino the year before. Rambellina is a great example of an identified gray whale with a traceable history. Just days ago, I discovered that this gray whale, previously thought to be supernova, is in fact not. So currently, I just call it Whale B. I'll go through my data, look at photos from that time. Whale B has deep parallel left fluke lacerations, most likely due to a boat propeller. The photo shows a fairly fresh, recent injury. Left photo might be Whale B. If so, these were taken 13 days later on September 18th. On the right is a gray whale with a left fluke injury exhibiting tissue necrosis, possibly a more advanced wound than the photo on the left. Both photos were taken the same day, same location, within a minute of each other. So is this another injured whale? Maybe a whale C? These 2 photos are from a series shot of a gray whale pretty far out from the bluff in Gualala and almost beyond the range of my camera gear. I did a lot of post-processing to make these somewhat usable. The whale was photographed only 5 days after the previous slides. So the question is it whale C with a left fluke injury? In this case, nearly complete left fluke amputation? Is it yet another injured whale? This is Caterpillar. Caterpillar is a small late summer visitor who foraged for many hours at Saunders, and I was able to photograph both sides centered on the dorsal knuckle and top and bottom flukes, as well as several other views. It appears that Caterpillar has been chewed on, most likely by orca, but has endured. Foul play, previously known as Highway 1, has toothache marks, an asymmetrical injury to the fluke notch, and is missing tissue in the left fluke trailing edge consistent with a bite wound. This gray whale is Supernova, who was documented as part of the Pacific Coast Feeding Group and cataloged by Cascadia Research and Happy Whale. It's thought that this gray whale has been entangled, shed the gear, but not before losing nearly most of its left fluke. Tracking Supernova has turned into a group effort since this whale seems to really get around. He or she was photographed on June 24th in Depot Bay, Oregon of 2020, September 5th, 2020 by a Gualala resident who took close-up photos from the beach, November 11th, 2020 at Gualala Point by me, and January 21st by resident Sea Ranch. And most recently, October 19th, 2021, near Depot Bay, Oregon. I'm certain Supernova has a CRC number, and I'll record it with the others as the winter part of my project. Gear notch is so named for what immediately looked to be evidence of an entanglement. The flukes show rope scars, and there is damage to the notched area where trailing gear tends to thread into, causing abrasions or even lacerations of the surrounding tissue. Gear notch appears to have been fortunate enough to have shed the gear, and he also bears the classic lightning bolt patterns of orca toothaches on the fluke tips. The left-hand photo was taken by a visitor with a camera phone and a spotting scope. They called this gray whale Seymour. Seymour has only paddle-like flukes showing healed white scars of an injury so severe that both fluke tips have been amputated, and there is significant remodeling to the affected notch and surrounding areas. These wounds may be consistent with a severe entanglement injury. Though it appears that Seymour has shed the gear, there's severe damage and a lot of fluke tissue has been lost. And finally, this is a gray whale I call Tabby. Tabby has a left fluke deformity, which is most likely an entanglement injury. Tabby's another gray whale who gets around. Happy Whale has a catalog photo of this whale in Depot Bay, Oregon in 2019. I first photographed Tabby on January 19th, 2021 at Saunders Reef. And again on April 23rd, 2021, about 60 miles south at Bodega Head. And finally, on August 12th, 2021, back on Saunders Reef. Tabby is the last gray whale photographed this summer and fall. This time of year, I was documenting gray whales throughout fall and a few into winter before the usual migration season. I'm just not seeing them here this fall. Before I finish up, I'd like to say thank you to the people who continue to support and collaborate with me on this project. Thank you, Scott and Tree Mercer, for giving this project a purpose. And thank you to Norma Jellison and many others who have fueled my passion for gray whales. I'd like to conclude this presentation with this short video of these amazing gray whales involved in shenanigans on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2021. They're just doing what they do.
Wow, thank you, Shari Goforth-Eby and Richard Charter for those presentations. I just have to say thank you so much again to Shari for pulling that together for us. And for those of you who are watching this Ocean Life Symposium on KGUA's YouTube channel, the information you have gotten from both of these speakers as they share their photos and their videos has been an enormous amount of information and wealth about the mammals, the cetaceans that are offshore. You know, and here at KGUA, we are in Gualala on the southern tip of the Mendocino coast, and we are so dedicated to ocean life. And our friends Scott and Tree Mercer from the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study have pulled together this symposium. We're so proud of them and to be able to work with them. And you noticed that Shari Goforth-Eby called herself a citizen scientist. It's very important to understand that this is a volunteer, but if you see, and we will share some photos, but for those of you who are listening only, the meticulous notebooks she takes of all the information of the whales that she has been seeing, how she learned to identify them, and she works with other whale organizations. So it's just an amazing amount of work that she does. And we're now going to say hi to our friends Scott and Tree Mercer from the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study. Good morning, you guys.
Good morning.
Great. Thank you so much, you two, for bringing this to us. You two both are actually scientists, have been working on studying whales and seals for decades. Scott actually used to also run whale sighting boats off of the coast of New England many years ago, and Teresa's a former science teacher. So you guys, what do you think about the presentations that we've seen so far, Richard Charter and of course, Shari Goforth-Eby, who you know pretty well?
Well, Richard, as always, was just phenomenal. And he has the great insight through his work in Washington with politicians and legislators. So having Richard, this is his second time with us. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, first year we spoke, we had this up in Mendocino as an in-person event, and Richard was unable to make it. But yeah, last year, of course, how can I forget that? Richard participated this way online, and today's talk, despite his travel plans and the storm we just had, just wonderful. Shari has been a huge help to us, and she realized early on that we needed some help. We couldn't be every place at once, and she's very mobile out there on the coast, and her work is very meticulous too. And as you saw, the note taking that she does, and I remember the first photo she took that I took a look at was that whale Rambo, which is now been renamed Rambolina. She sent it to me. I was home, and I got an email, and it was so good. I sent it to Cascadia Research, and within 15 minutes, John Kalamokidis, a very highly esteemed whale biologist, got back to me and said, yes, we know this whale. And he gave me the sighting record of it. And it turned out that Rambo was actually a female because the whale had been seen down in the Mexican lagoons with a calf. So it's like we're out of time.
That was the timer.
Like the egg was ready.
All right, we just wrap up what you were saying, Scott, and we'll
Yeah, we've got it.
we can move on in just a moment. here.
We've got a couple minutes here.
Yeah.
Okay, keep speaking.
Mhm.
Yeah, the video that Shari had, as I was watching it, I could see what it's turning out to be. It was, I guess you call whale foreplay. A couple of gray whales going through mating activity or courtship. Thank you. Courtship activity out here. This is an area where we usually see the courtship northbound while they're heading back up to their feeding grounds, which is a little late because courtship should be taking place southbound and in the lagoons in Mexico, we think. But at this point, those are usually just males who may not have, may have struck out down in the lagoons and are a bit frustrated, and they pretty randy still by the time they get up here and they see a female go by, and they just try their hardest.
All right, Scott, that's I think we're gonna be your last words there for this moment in time on our Ocean Life Symposium. But great stuff from them, and thank you, Scott and Tree, who we'll hear from throughout this series. This is the very first day of our Ocean Life Symposium, and I want to remind you that you can send questions and comments about anything that you're hearing, any speaker, to one long word, Ocean Life Symposium @gmail.com. And we have a whole crew of people in here who are monitoring and getting everything assembled, as we have the first 2 of 19 speakers who are coming up all this week. So it's time. Leanne, tell us what's happening next.
Yes, as a matter of fact, this is going to be running for 3 hours every day, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to noon. And then it will also be on YouTube. You can watch it later. You can watch it now live. This is KGUA in Gualala 88.3 FM. We are streaming around the world at kgua.org and on apps Radio Garden and TuneIn, and our own Air Pocket app, which is found at the website up in the upper left-hand corner. That's how you listen live. And also the schedule with all the speakers, all the titles, everything is right there for you. And yes, Peggy.
Oh, just want to add that a lot of these will also be on SoundCloud. That means
That's
audio
right.
only. You'll also be able to hear as well, and go to, as Leanne has been telling you, the YouTube channel to see these presentations. So, Mr. Callis, we were just watching Love in the Ocean.
Wasn't that fantastic, Peggy? Wow, stunning images, fantastic video of those majestic gray whales. Boy, who doesn't love that? Fascinating.
Absolutely. George Callis, take it away.
Well, our next speaker is Howie Garrett. Howie's with the Orca Network, and he'll be speaking on, this is a great topic, by the way, he'll be speaking on connecting whales and people in the Pacific Northwest. Howie's research career with whales began in 1981. Then in 2001, he and his wife, Susan Berta, founded the Orca Network, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to raising awareness of the whales of the Pacific Northwest. Let's all welcome Howie Garrett.
And I want to remind you, you are listening to
Good morning,
KGUA in
everyone,
Gualala.
from my office nook here on Whidbey Island. And many thanks to Scott and Tree and Leanne and the whole crew for making this very complicated technological feat possible. This morning, I'd like to talk about connecting whales and people in the Pacific Northwest. What does that mean, and how do we do that? We do that in several ways, but today I'm going to tell you about our whale sighting network. So this is about whales. It's also about us, about how people relate to whales, especially when properly introduced. So this is part uncontrolled experiment, part unparalleled social phenomenon, and part many-headed hydra that is completely out of hand. We offer a platform, a clearinghouse, a watering hole for people to come to find out the latest news about whales, to be aware of and learn about the orcas, gray whales, humpbacks, and minkies, and the beluga a few weeks ago, that move around and make their living in the inland waters of Washington. We receive reports by email, Facebook, text, or phone calls from people who see whales or hear about them, or from ferry captains or whale watch naturalists or marine mammal observers or float plane pilots, from anybody, really. We vet what is posted or reported, and we keep a Facebook thread going or send a text alert. And about once a week, we compile those reports chronologically and by species and email that to a wide audience, along with news, event announcements, issues, recent studies, etc. If there's any question about IDs or what's being reported, we ask researchers to confirm. We read papers, watch webinars, check am.am, attend workshops. We try to keep informed. We do all this at no charge because it's fun and rewarding and people want to be a part of it. And because public opinion matters. Fortunately, grants and donations cover the expenses of a staff of 10 altogether, 2 of whom maintain the sightings network. Many scientific studies, especially habitat and population studies on ecosystems and wildlife, express hope that their results can advise lawmakers and wildlife managers to conserve, protect, and restore species or habitats. They want their work to guide adaptive management strategies. But in the world of politics and economics, where those strategies and policies and priorities are often decided, they tend to keep an eye on public opinion. Excuse me. To some extent, we're all aware of public opinion, the knowledge, values, and beliefs about the natural world and environmental issues, and what's important to people. So we try to involve and engage the public by bringing the lives of the whales into people's lives every day. So people are engaged and able to see and hear and learn about the whales that we share this inland sea with. Public knowledge and opinion tends to influence the priorities of agencies and lawmakers. Public opinion matters. There's almost always something new to share. Different whales do different things every day. Every day brings fresh sightings and news and issues and opportunities to participate. Anyone can report whales. All demographics, ethnic backgrounds, political beliefs, denominations, all are welcome to contribute. When people see or hear about whales, whale magic kicks in. It's a mood lifter, an escape into reality. Always a pleasant surprise and usually a hint of mystery or curiosity about these huge, graceful, magnificent whales in our neighborhood. People are usually very happy to share their experience, and people are learning to include the location, type of whale, number of whales, direction of travel, and any photos, videos. There are other ways to report sightings, other hotlines, Facebook pages, or apps, but to my knowledge, no other sighting network gives the information back so that others will know where the whales are or where they were and maybe get a chance to see them. By sharing with the public, the reports mean more to people. It gives people a voice, a way to interact with others that's fun, and a chance to be part of an active community of like-minded people. They tend to want to help each other and share their excitement and questions. There's always a strong sense of place. The sightings almost always refer to local places, bays, parks, towns, restaurants that people who live around here know. I don't even know a lot of the places referred to. I do a lot of Googling to find maps of them, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. We also write letters to agencies and lawmakers and give presentations and interviews, etc. But the most interesting is what's up with the whales today. Over the past 25 years, Sighting Network has grown organically into a very unique role. It's a niche that has grown exponentially and is still growing. We just try to adapt it over the past few decades. The Whale Sighting Network started very, very small in the early 1990s when Susan Berta, who I didn't know at the time, but who subsequently became co-founder of Orca Network, and pretty soon we got married. When she was working as a volunteer coordinator for beach hunters, an environmental education program about the land and waters around Island County, that's Whidbey and Camino Island. The available office space for her was the top floor of Admiralty Head Lighthouse building. So let me take you there. There we are, Admiralty Head Lighthouse. She wasn't actually in the lighthouse itself. She was on the second floor of the building looking out over the head of Admiralty Inlet. Across there, you can see the Olympic Peninsula. And if the skies are extremely clear, you could see about 25 miles to the northwest to San Juan Island. So it is the opening into Puget Sound, into all of the waters and all of the people who live around Puget Sound, Seattle, Tacoma, all the little towns and islands and ferry crossings to the south. Right. So this was the opening. And Susan had kind of fallen in love with whales up in Alaska when she saw humpbacks and orcas. And when she would see whales out her office window, she would call a few friends and let them know, hey, there's whales. And when email came along, she began to use that and add to her list, and that made it a lot easier. And she could add some more. And so she had her own little sighting network that she just operated from her office while she was at work. And that was the bare beginning. That's how it really started. And this is where it happens. Of NASA, this great shot looking west over the Salish Sea out onto the Pacific Ocean, you can see Admiralty Inlet. And the lighthouse was right about at the point of that arrow. And Seattle is down there, and there's a multitude of inland waterways and all kinds of places where whales go, especially transients, to seek out seals and sea lions and porpoises. And there are the San Juan Islands right in the middle, and to the north is Georgia. So this is how we let people know and connect them, give them some insights into where the whales are, what they're doing, so that they'll have a sort of a consciousness, a mental awareness that whales live here, that they're in the neighborhood, that it's not only the towns and roads and their favorite shops and restaurants, but that these waters are full of whales. There are whales out there pretty much every single day, sometimes multiple groups of whales, usually orcas, but also humpbacks, makies, and some months of the year in the spring, there are also gray whales. We have these other programs. Besides the sighting network, we also administer the marine mammal stranding network for any marine mammals that wash up on a beach, alive or dead. And the Langley Whale Center in Langley, which is on the south end of Whidbey Island. And the Toki campaign, the Lolita campaign, which is how we really started, 1995. And it is still ongoing and is more complicated than ever, but it's not stuck in time. There's real dynamic processes going on right now. That's another whole talk. And of course, our education and advocacy programs, our outreach to presentations and media of all kinds, and our workshops and our ways of whales and our welcome the whales and other ways that we introduce people to whales. but this will be just about the sighting network, citizen science, and so much more. These were some of the early outreach vehicles. In the upper left there, Got Whales was our homespun version of it with just the essentials. And then a professional designer got a hold of it and refashioned it into a much more streamlined, modernistic look. But we still use both, and they get out there and they bring whales, bring people in to report whales from time to time. But in addition now, besides just calling the phone number, there's also email, and there's text, and there's messages of various kinds, Facebook messages, and we have a web form. Here are some of the breakdown of the different ways to report whales. Our Facebook page is probably the most common, most immediate. It's conversational. People can put in a report and others respond or add to it or learn from it. And that may help them to know where to go to find the whales. And if you call the number, it's a phone tree that will take you straight to the sighting network to report whales, or the stranding network to report stranded marine mammals, or to our office here. And instructions on how to report whales, time, date, etc., and photos and videos if possible. And now, in just the last few weeks, we have an app. Everybody's been looking for an app, and we have one, the Whale Alert app. It's actually adapted from the East Coast version that was built for NOAA, for the National Marine Sanctuary there, to help big ships avoid right whales. This screen grab that I have here from October 14th just happens to show when some southern residents were headed out. Those were the points that were reported where the little dorsal fin is, or tail, flukes. And a very interesting little side note on that is that right about where the upper one is, when people were reporting those whales, the orcas going by, heading north out of Admiralty Inlet, they also saw a beluga. I'll have more on that later, but that sort of gives you a sense of you never know what people are going to see out there and report. Or if you happen to be in Langley or Cookville, you can ring the bell. Not that that goes directly to us, but eventually those reports will come to us from someone who is watching whales. And here are the people who make it happen. Lisa Lemire Brooks, Sightings Network Coordinator. She sort of fields everything, monitors the Facebook and other outreach, and keeps track of things. And here she's modeling our hat. And Gail Swigert, our sightings report publisher, she does that arduous task of putting together the long sighting report. Pretty much once a week, compiles everything into a report that can be huge. There are so many photos and so many reports. When they come down into Puget Sound, there are a lot of people looking for them and reporting them. So our goals overall are to gather whale sightings from really virtually anyone and share sightings, again, with anyone, and document the patterns, trends in habitat. We have archives go back to 2001 that you can tease out all kinds of trends and interesting information, and habitat use, and a lot of interesting information can be gleaned out of that. And it's to raise awareness, to let people know about the presence of whales. They're critical issues they need to know about, to help with, to provide better conditions, food supply, better water quality for the whales. And we generally educate, because whales are fascinating. The more people know, the more they want to know. And there is so much to know, so much natural history, so much social history, so much just information about social structures and family patterns and different behaviors. And so we educate about it. As we go, it sort of fits right in to what we do. And we motivate involvement to get things done, to put some pressure on agencies and politicians to get the job done to help whales. And there are many ways that needs to be done. Try to keep people up to date with how that can be done. On the left there is just one example of sightings map that goes out on our website. And that it's not a scientific, perfectly calibrated statistical form exactly, but it shows you that there are whales everywhere, just about all the time. Each one of those icons is a whale, either transients or residents, and you can tell from the icon if there's a T, transient, otherwise it's residents, and the dates that they are seen in that general area. Of course, we can't put up an icon for every single sighting, or it would get very cluttered very fast, but that's pretty much an idea of how there are whales in Puget Sound and in the Salish Sea, around the San Juan Islands, around the Gulf Islands, in the Gulf of Georgia, Strait of Georgia, and the Strait of Juan de Fuca all the time. And you get reports from all those. And other benefits of the sighting network are that we educate boaters. We do a lot of outreach to boaters to do well, to behave, to be respectful, to show basic decency and courtesy around whales. Slow to 7 knots. And if you see a blow, go slow. There are regulations. I'll get into those too, but basically it's a matter of attitude and manners and courtesy and respect for these whales that are out there. And when boaters learn that, they'll behave accordingly. And we have our Share the Water Boater Ed program is another way that we educate watchers. We have a Facebook page called Share the Water, and do a lot of that. And we get coastal reports from California, Oregon, and the Washington coast, which sort of gives some indication. Not a lot, because most of the time whales are just not seen out there. They're there, but they're just not often seen. They're maybe a few miles offshore and not seen from shore. And our sightings reports are used when companies are pile driving for new docks or whatever, or doing seismic testing. We help to warn them if there are whales in the area, or testing for tidal turbines. That has come up, where they have had us identify the whales that come into the area where they are planning or proposing to do some tidal turbines. And we monitor the ghost shrimp that are essential to the gray whales that come in. And this is another amazing story that is illuminated by the sightings that we get and the studies of the Cascadia Research Collective in Olympia, Washington, who come up and do surveys of the what they are calling the sounders, a dozen or so gray whales into the south end of Whidbey and in between there in the mainland every spring, usually late February right on into May or sometimes June, and they depend on those shrimp. And there are also commercial harvests of the shrimp. So we've been working with the Department of Natural Resources for several years to mitigate that, to not harvest in the areas and in the times when gray whales are there to find those shrimp. And we do improve the economy. That's a fringe benefit, but the town of Langley and the Chambers of Commerce really love us because we've made Langley into sort of whale central. And so a lot of people come in to see the whales and spend the night or even move here sometimes because they love knowing that there are whales right out here, right in our neighborhood. So this is how we introduce all the whale reports. Start with the essentials, confirmed residence, PADI in this case. It was October 16th. And we give, the essentials of the report, and then follow that up with a big voter education plea, how to behave around whales. Southern resident orcas, give them 300 yards parallel and 400 yards in front or behind. And then the big transient whales, 200 yards all around you at all times, and 100 yards around any baleen whales you might see. And again, slow, 7 knots, within a half mile of the whales. So we are very intensive on voter education to avoid any kind of disturbance to the whales.
This is
And we
KGUA.
also let people know about issues and advocacies and events, announcements of how they can help whales. This month, October, is Orca Salmon Month in Puget Sound. We're having events, and so are a lot of other groups. It's sort of a general, any nonprofits or any organizations interested in orcas and or salmon have joined in to Orca Salmon Month. We started that in 2001, actually, and it's grown a lot. There are just so many different organizations. These are just examples of how people are tuned in to the connection between orcas and salmon. That's an essential connection. Southern resident orcas depend on Chinook salmon for about 80% of their diet. They really cannot live without abundant supplies of Chinook salmon. That is the leading cause for the declines, the very precarious endangered status of southern resident orcas. So that orca salmon connection is essential for the public to understand, and it's come a long way. General populace around here, the public opinion, certainly around here in the Pacific Northwest, is that orcas need salmon, and we need to increase salmon runs where they can forage on them. And we also do special announcements such as the 17 days, 17 ways that people can help orcas based on the 17 days that J35 Halleck carried her deceased calf, her daughter, T. Tahlequah. She was named by our Samish friends. This is one example, one day, that 17-day campaign. And I see this as a result of that consciousness raising, that public opinion that orcas need salmon and salmon need habitat, salmon need rivers, salmon need access to spawning upriver, and the biggest blockage with the least benefit are the 4 Snake River dams. They have been a real big issue for quite a long time. And it's coming to a head. There is such strong resistance to removing or breaching, not the dams, actually, it's just the earthen berms on the side of each of the dams, but basically removing the blockages on the Snake River to allow the salmon to get upstream and for those smolts that are spawned upstream to be able to get downstream without running into these slack, stagnant pools, these reservoirs behind the dams that halts their progress down to the ocean. That's what's pulling off the populations of salmon in the Snake River watershed, which is huge. That's another entire presentation, but a huge, nearly pristine wilderness area upstream of these dams that once spawned probably the most salmon anywhere in the world. I could say North America, but I don't know if there's any other place in the world that has such perfect spawning habitat. And the dams have been blocking those for years. So we're generating, along with a wide variety and dozens of other organizations and individuals and a few elected officials to let people know that the dams are killing those salmon. And that is coming around. In the last 3 years, that connection between orcas and those salmon has become very well understood. In 2018, our Governor Inslee launched the Orca Recovery Task Force. And from that was a special study group to look at whether to breach those dams. And it was inconclusive, but it raised that issue. It contributed to that connection in people's minds that the orcas need the salmon need the rivers, and they need access to that watershed. And that has become pretty well understood now. So that is sort of one extremely indirect result, raising awareness about the orcas and what they need in Northwest.
This is KGUA in Gualala.
So here is one of the roughly weekly sighting reports that go out by email to a very large list. I'll get into the numbers very soon. But this just gives you a sense of how they look. They have the photo of the day and the introduction, and then the summary of which whales we're seeing where. The last report came out. And then the reports and the photos or videos from the report. We also publish the Center for Whale Research Encounters. We borrow them from their page, which are obviously, the best, most meticulous and detailed, and with the very best photos of any reports come in from anywhere, only concerning the ones that CWR researchers go out on. So they're excellent, but there are many other reports they don't go out on, but we report theirs and link to the website for people to go to get the full report. And you just really have to look at it. It's huge. And there's so many beautiful photos, so many different reports from so many different people, and they reflect the excitement, reflect the joy of seeing whales, what people will do to go way out of their way to go see some whales when they hear about them. and then help others. They share those reports. They learn from others where to go to find the reports, to find the whales, and they will then share those reports with others so that, more people, it forms a big network or a community of its own of people who just benefit from the reports by finding the whales and having those experiences and those stories and learning about what they need. And also available, and with a link on every one of the whale reports that goes out, is our sightings viewpoints map. It's actually an interactive Google map, so you can zoom in and out. And when you click on any one of those stars, it will lead you to a description with a photo of exactly where they are, how to get there. Are they accessible? Is there a long path? Are there hills in the way? Any little details that you might want to know to be able to see whales from many, many different public viewpoint locations down basically Puget Sound. And of course, there are many other places, and people see whales from their own homes, from their windows, from their yards, from their office buildings. So this isn't certainly all of the places where people see whales, but for people who are looking for where are they going to find whales, say off of Vashon Island, well, they can go down and look at all these different viewpoints, and that will be how they can get there and know where they're going and see whales. We try to encourage and facilitate the process of getting to the whales, and that connects people and whales. And you can also listen from anywhere. It's online at orcasound.net, which maintains, at this point, 3 different hydrophones that are in the water off of San Juan Island, and then Port Townsend right there at the top of Admiralty Inlet, and Bush Point, which is on the west side of Whidbey Island. So you can listen to the whales going by from any of those locations. And also the Whale Museum live stream is on YouTube, which gives you the sound and the video, a live stream video of the waters off of the lighthouse, the Lime Kiln Lighthouse, to be able to see the whale. So that's exciting. So people can watch from their own homes or listen. And you never know what's going to happen. That's the excitement of seeing whales and knowing that they're out there and keeping a track, not an eye on our Facebook page and our emails and alerts that you never know what's going to show up. Like, for instance, on October, I'm going to play this short video here that is the moment of discovery of the beluga that showed up in Commencement Bay, that's by Tacoma, Washington, south of Seattle, on October 3rd. And it's the moment of discovery.
And we're looking off into the water. Scott, are you there?
Yes, we're just starting to see it now. You can see how white the beluga is. They're about 12 to 13 feet long and weigh about...
That was my response to, can't be a beluga, but it was.
Thank you, Scott.
And that launched a lot of effort to try to keep track of that whale and hopefully identify it. Boy, I don't envy the research interns that try to match belugas. Check that out. There's no dorsal fin. There's no markings. There's a very vague shape. Sometimes there are, peculiarities. There are certain little dips or scratches or scars that you might be able to go by. And there is an ID catalog of the Cook Inlet beluga population. That's the closest population to Washington. But we don't know for sure, and we'll probably never know if this particular beluga came from there or not. And what was very interesting, and you saw it in that screen grab image of the Whale Alert app on October 3rd. That's when the beluga left. But he or she didn't leave alone. The beluga was in Puget Sound off Seattle on the late morning, October 14th, and so were southern residents. They weren't far away. They weren't in close association. They were a couple of miles apart, but whales are very aware of what's going on around for many miles. So they were certainly aware of each other. So this beluga kind of tailed along just as the southern residents headed up Puget Sound and into Admiralty Inlet to head out. So did the beluga, maintaining apparently a distance of a couple of miles, but right alongside, right in sync with the southern residents. So it's as if the southern residents led the beluga out Puget Sound. Maybe beluga came in and kind of got a little disoriented and didn't know how to get out. He seemed healthy full time, very active, but kind of going back and forth, going to shipyards sometimes. And, I don't know what was going on, but maybe the whale needed to get out of there. And the southern residents showed the beluga the way to get out. It's quite a story. Kind of have to use a little imagination, but the beluga was right alongside the southern residents on the way out. And then there was this event. This was pretty strange. It was this 17-year-old male transient popped up beside a boat to the east of Whidbey Island in Saratoga Passage. And no other whales were around, and this whale had not been seen all day. This is the T65As, who are a family of 5. And this is their strapping teenage sibling, male that looks pretty close to full adult. And he just suddenly popped up out of nowhere and came over to this very small boat with just a couple of people in it and started, mugging it the friendly way of just swimming around it, and did a little nudge and pushed the boat a little bit, nice and gentle, but an experience that they'll never forget, no doubt. And, what was that about? We don't know. Thought maybe that this young male had split off and had to, leave his matroline, but no, he was back. He just has a tendency to be miles away from family on many occasions, and apparently they must have been around somewhere, but nobody reported them that day. He came over and visited. So things like that happen that are just amazing, and that come out in our whale reports. And then there's this, the rumble in Harrow Strait, September 12th. That same family, the T65As and Bs, were in a nice big cuddle puddle, which is, they were kind of celebrating or relaxing after a feast. They must have brought down a seal or two. When the southern residents, 11 southern residents, and those are ID'd by Whale Watch naturalists, K14s, K16s, L72s, and L91s, showed up in the middle of them. Whereupon the T's lined up, got information, and booked it on out of there at about 30 knots. They went faster than any boat could keep up with them for 1.5 miles. So we don't know what happened. Nobody saw any actual physical contact or altercation, but it was definitely a case of time to get out of there for the transients. So things like that happen, and that's only the second time there's been that kind of a, what looked like a very aggressive and probably hostile interaction between transients and residents. And that's the kind of thing that we can report that otherwise would go unnoticed and unrecorded. So help make that part of the public record. So let me give you a little bit of a sense of the scale of what we do. There are 180,000 Facebook followers. I'm not going to go through all of those numbers, but you can see that there's just humongous number of people who are attuned constantly, daily, to what's going on by our sighting network of various ways, our Facebook, our emails, our texts, so that they can keep track of the whales. And our visitors to Langley Whale Center, we have reopened now. We were closed for about 6 months, but we're reopened at least 4, maybe 5 days a week now. We're kind of inching up, and hopefully we can stay open, but we're still not to the 3,000 visitors a year that we had in 2019, but approaching that. And we do put the sightings into spreadsheet form. Debbie Stewart, our stalwart volunteer and board member, translates all of those that go out in the emails into a spreadsheet for orchids only, not including baleen whales. But for pigs, whales, and southern residents, every single report, every single reporting party is recorded on these spreadsheets, which go to research, to NOAA, Center for Whale Research, and other research who can use them for whatever data purposes they have. So I'll follow with a few graphs and charts just to sort of give you a little bit of a sense of the liveliness, the constant action that's going on with the sighting report. So we got up until September 30 in this year, 2021, over 6,000 reports of just orchids. And a lot of email contacts. These are the number of people that we send out the email reports to, over 16,000 get the emails about once a week. And of course, they all can unsubscribe, so they all want to be on this. And this gives you a sense of the growth, the trend upward of the overall sightings and observations are growing year by year by year. At the rate we're going, it's going to be over 7,000 this year. It was over 6,000 last year, and so on. So this is the way it's catching on and taking off and growing beyond all expectations. You imagine it started in a lighthouse with just a few friends by telephone, and it's 7,239 people that logging sightings. So those are just the ones that are sending in sightings. How many other people see whales? They read the reports, and sea whales, they just don't happen to send in a report. So this gives you a sense of the different types. Blue is the big transient orchids, and the orange are southern residents. And as you can see, we have ID'd almost every single report. There are a few that remain unidentified, but virtually every single one is identified at least by type. And you can see that the transients were pretty much the only ones that anybody saw. From April right through August, it wasn't until September, and then for 4 months through December, that we had southern residents. And those are mainly when they come down into Puget Sound going after chum. If you go back 10 years, from April until August was when there were southern residents all over the San Juan Islands, every day, virtually every day. And now they're just non-existent. They just don't up there out in the open ocean. So this gives you that data very graphically. And this is another way to look at the same thing. Look at the total number of big transients versus southern residents, 5,600 in the past 12 months of the bigs compared to only 1,400, almost 1,500 reports of southern residents. So we're just not seeing very many southern residents around anymore compared to transients, which are everywhere. They've really increased their habitat use all around the Salish, all these inland waters. Sometimes 2 or 3 or more groups, natural lines of big transients around. And this is sort of a breakdown of who reports. And the important thing here is 60% of the reporters are first timers. They're just people who got the opportunity, they saw the whales, and they reported them. So how many people are out there who are looking for whales, but just don't happen to have a chance to see them or to report them? But it just shows there's a huge sort of a untapped populace out there who are eager to see whales. And they really like reporting them. And then we have our super spotters, the ones that we can pretty well count on to get out there and see whales whenever they're anywhere nearby. And we do this because people love seeing whales. And we increase the chances of seeing them. It's a very simple calculation. Participants, they share sightings and they help each other and they build that community of sharing and enjoying each other's experiences. And they become engaged, care about whales. And they remember those experiences. The whales brought them joy. They want to help. And that is a sort of an involvement and engagement and a commitment to doing something about whales so we don't have to push on people because the whales do the work. Whale magic takes over and engages people in that way. Whales like this change people. That's a gray whale, suction feeding for shrimp right off the Langley waterfront. That's about 2 blocks from the Langley Whale Center, by the way. And people just in awe, just looking at these wonderful whales. I mean, they're kind of changed. They carry that experience. So remember that. They share that experience. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. There's really not time left. But this is someone who raced down to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge to see whales. And you can just see her excitement and her dedication to seeing whales. It was emotional, as she says. And she described, many sacrifices, sore legs, running in the rain, but she saw those whales. That's the kind of commitment. That's the kind of people that are out there that we help to see whales and then help them tell their stories when they do see them. Because people do come running. They find places. They get out and see whales when they're coming by. They social distance. Don't worry, but they also share. They share what they know about whales, so what they hear, and who the whales are. It builds that community on the shore side and by social media all the time. So I want to leave you with some words by Roger Payne that I think help to sum up why we do what we do, the value of connecting whales and people. There's a power of awe in sheer size, the way a redwood inspires more than a dog. And we need something universally inspirational to arouse us to action. We need nothing less than for humanity to fall in love with non-human forms. If we understand what animals are saying to each other, what they are communicating, what occupies their thoughts, what they love, fear, desire, avoid, treasure. If we could communicate with them to find those answers, the public might soon be moved enough to at least start the process of the runaway destruction of life. Roger Payne. So I don't know that we can communicate with them to get those answers exactly, if there's any hope of finding some kind of common language that we can use to actually ask whales. But you know, when you see them, when you admire them, when you become engaged with them by seeing them over time again and again and hear about other people's reports, you build an empathy way of trying to understand. And that opens the door. That allows their, at least our conjecture, our imagination of their fears, their desires, and what they need and what they treasure, and of their grief. Certainly, they go through many tragedies, and human activity has a lot to do with tragedies. And when we learn that, it's a powerful motivation to do what has to be done. Whether that's cleaning up the water, quieting the water, tearing down some dams. So that's connecting whales and people with the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you, Howie Garrett. That was such a
Thank you
moving
all very much.
presentation. Such a great
Please get in
presentation,
touch if
and
you have any questions or comments.
connecting whales and people in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Peggy Berryhill, along with Leanne Lindsay. George Callis is here. In the other room, we have Scott and Tree Mercer from Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, and more members of KGUA's support staff. Roberta Chan is with us, and just the first day, we are nearing the end of our first day of the Ocean Life Symposium. Coming up in just a few minutes will be our final speaker of today, and a local speaker at that. But before we get there, just, you know, there's really not much more to summarize than what Howie Garrett said about respecting other life, and how all of us, even here, you know, those of us who live here along the coast, I know I'm speaking for Leanne and for George and for Roberta, all of us, when we see a whale spout, we see a fin, we see a back, we stop our cars, we pull over, we just are enamored and mesmerized by watching this gigantic whale in the ocean. Don't you feel that same way, George?
Absolutely. It's magical almost, and you want to stop and look for as long as you can.
And that's right.
It's
Everybody
true.
says it's magic, and that's exactly how it feels. And to know that there are people who are working to preserve their lives and understanding these mammals. We're mammals. So as mammals, we've got to stick together on all of this.
Scott?
And so, Scott, what did you, can you summarize a little bit more Howie Garrett's presentation?
Well, sure. I've known Howard for at least since 1981 or 82. And we worked out of the same area and worked the same waters in New England together. Howard worked out of Gloucester and I was in Newburyport. And we were often on the water at the same time. And his commitment to orcas is the same commitment that I saw 1982, 83, with his commitment to marine life and protecting the animals in the Stellwagen Bank area and the Gulf of Maine. Howard and his brother, his incredible brother, Ken Balcom have really committed their lives to the ocean environment. And I would encourage all of you to get a hold of Orca Network, either Google their website or if you're on Facebook, go to Orca Network and give them a like. And you can sign up to get the regular newsletter from them, and also the Orca Network sighting.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott.
I'm sorry, Scott, we're out of time.
Boiled eggs
And
are
we're
ready
out of
again.
time. And we need to leave this up. We're going to play a spot from our sponsor and be right back. This is KGUA in Gualala, 88.3 FM, streaming around the world at kgua.org. And we are going to go now to share the screen and play the spot for you. And we'll be right back after that. And let's get Mike.
Biscayne and Company is ready to serve your real estate needs along the dramatic Pacific coast. Our team lives and works locally and knows each community we serve. From southern Mendocino County and northern Sonoma County, including Timber Cove to the south, to Sea Ranch, Gualala, Anchor Bay, and to the north Mendocino coast, Point Arena, Manchester, and Irish Beach. The members of our team are locals to the Mendonoma coastal area. There's no team better to help you with all your coastal real estate needs. That's Lisberg and Company, 707-785-3322. We are proud sponsors of the Ocean Life Symposium.
Linden Design Gallery, owned by Lou and Maynard Linden, is a small design-focused fine arts gallery on the Sea
That was
Ranch.
cute.
And like their former business, Placewares, it has become a hub for conversations where they share their love of good design to our communities. Linden Design Gallery is a proud sponsor of the Ocean Life Symposium, airing live on KGUA in Gualala, Monday through Friday, October 25th through October 29th. That's Linden Design Gallery at 1000 Annapolis Road, open on Saturdays from 11 to 4.
And this is KGUA in Gualala, 88.3 FM. It is the first day of the third annual Ocean Life Symposium for 3 hours each day this week. From 9 a.m. to noon, we will hear from 19 local and national ocean experts and citizen scientists who will talk about the health and future of our oceans and the life forms within them. Our studios are located on the Pacific Ocean on the South Mendocino coast in Gualala, California. The sponsors are the Sea Ranch Lodge, Linden Design Gallery, Lisberg and Company Realtors, the Sea Ranch Supply, and CNA Metalworks. You can listen live at kgua.org. Just click listen live at the top of the page, or use apps Radio Garden or TuneIn. Best of all, though, we are live YouTube. So you can watch us right now, watch the presentations, or catch up later whenever you like. There is an interactive speaker schedule at kgua.org. Just click on the schedule link and you'll see the background info and topics as you look at each speaker. I'm Leanne Lindsay, one of your hosts and the co-producer, along with co-producers Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, KGUA hosts George Callis and Peggy Berryhill. And again, if you are going to want to listen to this later, you can go to SoundCloud or to YouTube to watch or listen to it again. And now, George, who is our next speaker here?
Thanks, Leanne. Our next presenter is Helen Killeen. Helen's with the Bodega Marine Lab, which is part of UC Davis. She'll be speaking on warming from the bottom up, climate impacts at the base of the food web, and the implications for California marine species. Helen's a Ph.D. candidate with UC Davis, and she's studying ecology of coastal marine systems, and her focus is on the commercial, cultural, and ecological impacts to fisheries of California. Her dissertation focuses on the linkage between climate change and our fish and plankton life. Let's welcome Helen Killeen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. It's a real pleasure. As George was saying, my name is Helen Killeen, and I'm a PhD candidate at UC Davis and the Bodega Marine Laboratory, which is a gorgeous place if you haven't had a chance to go there before. It's located in Bodega Bay, California, and you can see a picture of it here on the screen if you're not only listening on the radio. The laboratory is located right on the coast and has access to a wide variety of ecosystems, including the pelagic realm, which is sort of what I'm going to be focusing on today. If you're interested to learn more about any of the things that I'll be talking about, please visit my website or check out my Twitter at Helen Killeen. Some of the stuff I'll be focusing on today comes from work that I've been doing with the Farallones Institute of Advanced Ecosystem Research, located in Petaluma, California. So I want to mention them as well. And before I get started, I really want to thank everyone at KGUA and the organizers of the Ocean Life Symposium, Scott and Tree Mercer, Peggy Berryhill, Leanne, George, Paul, and everyone else who's been involved to make this event possible. This week, we'll be hearing about some of the most important issues affecting our coast, from climate change to whale conservation to opportunities for renewable energy in marine spaces. And I'm really pleased to be a part of all of this. We're living in a time of great environmental change, as this last weekend on the Mendocino and Sonoma coast has let us know. Human-driven climate change is impacting our surroundings in so many ways. Since starting my PhD at UC Davis, my husband and I have had to evacuate maybe about a half dozen times due to the threat of wildfires. And you can see a map of local historical wildfires on the screen here. Like so many other Californians these days, higher air temperatures and drought conditions have combined to alter the way that we order our lives, plan for our health and safety, and maybe even change where we choose to live. In coastal California, we're intimately aware of how warming and changes in atmospheric patterns are impacting our lives on land, but many of us are less sure of how these phenomena are affecting marine systems and marine life. So today I want to talk to you about that a little bit. I want to talk about some of the ways that climate change is impacting marine ecosystems off the coast of California by focusing on what's happening at the bottom of the food web. The California Coastal Current describes the California current ecosystem. And all of what I'm going to talk about today happens in that California current ecosystem. This ecosystem is really special because it's characterized by highly productive coastal waters where cold, nutrient-rich upwelled waters fuel abundant populations of fish and invertebrates that are in turn food for an amazing diversity of larger fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. The California current, which you can see here, as well as some of the phytoplankton blooms that swirl off the coast, is also special in that it supports valuable commercial and recreational fisheries, as well as an active tourism industry, which together in Sonoma County alone employ over 6,000 individuals and provide more than $300 million in goods and services annually. So we know that this place is very important for society, and we know that this place is really ecologically rich. But the health of this vibrant coastal California ecosystem, with its enormous benefits to society and its rich cultural significance, relies very closely on the transfer of energy from the bottom of the food web up to the important animals that we make a living off of and make this place so special. So this is what makes the bottom of the food web so important. The bottom of the food web in the California current ecosystem is largely made up of forage fish, like some of the ones that you see here, including anchovy and sardines, but also some lesser known characters like lanternfish, which are enormously abundant, but occupy deeper waters, and sand lance, smelt, herring, and Pacific saury. Also part of the forage community, low trophic individuals, are juvenile rockfish or juvenile stages of other fishes. You can see an example of a juvenile rockfish on the screen here. This is a juvenile gopher rockfish. And these these animals are small enough so that they're similar in size to other forage fish species, and become an important food source when they're in their smaller juvenile stages. Zooplankton are also an important part of the bottom of the food web in coastal California. Zooplankton are a diverse group of organisms that drift in ocean currents, consuming phytoplankton, detritus, and smaller zooplankton. This group includes some familiar characters like krill, which you may know of because they're so important for whales, salmon, and seabirds. You can see a blue whale here lunging at a swarm of krill off the coast of Oregon. But zooplankton also includes some less commonly known characters like copepods, which are small, but so plentiful globally that they're among the most abundant taxonomic groups on Earth. So this collection of species that makes up the bottom of the food web is sometimes called lower trophic species or forage species. And they're key indicators of ecosystem health. That's because they're some of the first organisms in the marine ecosystem to be impacted by changing environmental conditions and climate change. This is because they rely directly on the oceanographic processes that drive phytoplankton production, and because these small animals tend to be very sensitive to changes in seawater temperature. So as oceanographic conditions change, lower trophic levels, like the forage species I've been mentioning, tend to experience effects first that foreshadow what we observe later among their predators. A good example of this is the Cassin's auklet, which is this small, adorable bird that feeds almost exclusively on krill and copepods. In times where waters have been warm and krill has been less abundant, Cassin's auklets have seen major die-offs that are record-setting in our history of observing these birds. Marine heat waves are a particularly useful tool to make inferences about how climate change is likely to impact the bottom of the food web. Marine heat waves are an almost annual occurrence on the coast of California and are very helpful for taking a glimpse at how California might be impacted by climate change in the future. Perhaps the most famous marine heat wave in recent times was the 2014 to 2015 heat wave, sometimes called the blob. And this heat wave attracted national attention and international attention for its highly visible impacts on marine life, including high rates of seal and sea lion mortality. However, the events that led up to these observations are often less well known. So in winter of 2014, an area of anomalously high sea surface temperatures formed and was observed in the Gulf of Alaska, north of the California current ecosystem. And that area of warm water seemed to persist from even late 2013 through winter of 2014, in part because water wasn't recirculating down southward towards the equator because of a high pressure ridge that formed at the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska. In fall of 2014, the California current ecosystem began to experience some of the first impacts of that blob of warm water from the Gulf of Alaska moving into our region. In fact, one National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration observing buoy off the coast of Northern California observed a 7 degrees Celsius increase in sea surface temperature within a 1-hour period in September of 2014. So it really shows you how that water moved suddenly into our area in fall 2014. And that water persisted, that warm water persisted in our area off our coast through winter of 2015 and into fall of 2015. In fall of 2015, we began to experience the double whammy effect of the blob, which is what made one of the factors that made this period so impactful to the marine ecosystems off our coast. And this happened when an El Nino that was forming along the equator began to move northward up into our region. So not only were we being impacted from north to south by the impacts of anomalously warm sea surface temperatures from the Gulf of Alaska, but at that point we began to be impacted by warmer waters coming from the south northwards due to the El Nino. So this marine heat wave was sort of a fascinating and tragic period in which we observed lots of impacts on marine predators. But it also had some really key important impacts that often go unnoticed at the bottom of the food web. One of those impacts was that we observed changes in prey abundance. Changes in prey abundance of key forage, low trophic level species along our coastline. So every year, NOAA and the National Marine Fisheries Service sets out to survey animals and both local resident species and transient species, all up and down the California coast. There are several of these surveys. One of them is the Cal Coffee survey in Southern California. And another one is the Rockfish Recruitment and Ecosystem Assessment survey that tends to focus on the central and northern parts of California. One of the outcomes of this Rockfish Recruitment and Ecosystem Assessment survey, which targets juvenile rockfish, is that they also collect krill in their nets. So we have this really great time history record of krill abundance all across the continental shelf and from north to south, all along California, going back about 30 years. You can see some of the sites that the National Marine Fisheries Service samples as part of that effort on the map here. And you can also see what some of that work looks like as these large ships go out and they collect enormous amounts of material from the waters. Those organisms have to be sorted by researchers and volunteers, community scientists, into different taxonomic groups. And then once we have them sorted, we can count them and start to make guesses about what is going on in the ecosystem. So one of the key takeaways is that krill abundance during the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave declined dramatically in a way that was almost unprecedented in the past 10 to 20 years. So I apologize for those who are only listening, but I am going to show some plots in this presentation, and I'll do my best to describe what you're looking at or what we're looking at. So this plot shows a time series or a history of krill abundance in the California current ecosystem. So when these lines go up, that means that there's more krill in the ecosystem. And when they go down, that means that there's less. I'm actually showing two different species here, Euphausia pacifica and Thysanoessa spinifera, which are the two species that are sort of the most key for predator species like salmon, rockfish, seabirds, and blue and humpback whales. What you can see is that during 2015, where this arrow is pointing us to, we see a dramatic decline in both Thysanoessa spinifera and a decline in Euphausia pacifica. But the decline in Thysanoessa spinifera is particularly remarkable. And all of this work comes from work done by Megan Cimino and colleagues in 2020. So the abundance of krill available for predators in coastal California changed during the marine heat wave. But something else that we've begun to notice is that prey also got smaller. Krill also got smaller during this same time period. So now I'm showing data from some of my own work along with colleagues at the Farallones Institute in Petaluma, California, which shows the same two species, Thysanoessa spinifera and Euphausia pacifica. This mean length or the mean size of these animals declined during 2015 the period highlighted here in red. They declined from times before 2013. From 2013 to 2015, we see a decline in the mean size of both species and a recovery in the size afterwards. One thing that you might notice about this plot is that there's actually 4 lines here, right? There's a line for females of both species and a line for males of both species. Typically, female krill are larger than male krill. And this is in part because they need to have more energy reserves in order to produce their, allocate energy towards reproduction and the development of eggs that they eventually spawn. So females tend to be larger than males. But in 2015, what we saw is that female and male krill were more similar in size than at any other time in the time series in our history of records for this particular survey. And for Thysanoesis spinifera, one of the 2 species, we actually see a flip-flop. Males of that particular species became larger than females. And what this tells us is that there's something more going on here. We're not just seeing krill get smaller overall, but we're seeing that during the marine heat wave, females got much smaller relative to males, and sometimes males were even found to be larger. We think that what might be going on here is that during this period when krill found it difficult to grow, either because warmer waters means that krill have higher metabolism, so it takes more energy for them to do their normal things like swim about and find food. It also is possible that during this period, because they were expending so much more energy on metabolic processes, like just surviving, that allocating any energy at all towards reproduction, sending any of their energy reserves towards egg production, resulted in a dramatic decline in their ability to grow in size. So what we think might be happening here is that the cost of reproduction of these species came dramatically at the expense of their body size. Okay, so why is all of this important? Well, the size of krill and the abundance of krill are both critically important because together, abundance and size of animals tell us about the biomass that is available for marine predators, like salmon, like blue whales, and humpbacks. What you can see on the screen here, and I'll describe for those who are listening on the radio, is a plot that shows all of the food web connections that we're aware of, connecting krill, shown here in red, to a wide variety of marine predators. Some of them you might notice are familiar, like piscivorous rockfish, fish-eating rockfish, or Chinook salmon, but also things you might not even think about, like sablefish or large forage fish, or even pandalus shrimps. There's a lot out there that relies on krill. So when krill are smaller and less abundant, there is less food available for marine predators. So let's say that a krill is a hamburger, right? Let's assume that if from the perspective of a marine predator, let's say a krill is a hamburger. Before the marine heat wave, you had big hamburgers and you had lots of hamburgers. During the heat wave, one of the impacts was that not only were there fewer hamburgers available for you to eat, but those hamburgers were smaller. So the total amount of energy being transferred from the physical environment through the phytoplankton into the upper trophic level species is much less. One silver lining to all of this is that when we look at changes in krill length through time, we see this dramatic decline in 2015. These 2 species of critical krill got smaller, but we see that in 2016, they both increased in size very rapidly. And what this tells us is that there is some kind of resilience to at least the dynamics of this one species. And I think also many other species as well. So what that means is that resilience is the ability of an ecosystem or a population to recover from a disturbance. And at least for krill, we're seeing that in terms of size, they can recover pretty quickly from events like marine heat waves. Another silver lining that we're seeing from this work on krill body size in the California current is that we found several locations along the California coast where krill body size didn't seem to be as strongly impacted by the effects of the marine heat wave. We saw that this was particularly the case in what the National Marine Fisheries Service refers to as the core region, which extends from southern Monterey Bay up past north of Point Arena, or excuse me, north of Point Reyes. And in this area, we saw that krill didn't experience as strong of a decline in body size during the marine heat wave than in other locations of the California current. Part of this could be that in this area, the core region, coastal upwelling is very strong from year to year. And even during 2015, when upwelling was weaker than average, it did still exist in that area. Richard Charter did a really great job earlier this morning of describing what coastal upwelling is, but I'll do it again for any of those who might just be tuning in. Coastal upwelling is a really exciting and important ecological process where on our coast, northwesterly winds during the spring and summer move water southward along the coast. And due to the rotation of the earth, as that water moves south, it also moves offshore. When surface water moves offshore, it's got to be replaced by something. And so that results in a sort of a suction mechanism where deeper waters that are nutrient rich and tend to be colder and more highly saline, more saltier waters get pulled up towards the surface. Those nutrient rich waters fuel phytoplankton blooms and provide cool, food rich habitat for animals like krill. So in these locations where coastal upwelling is persistent, particularly in years where we have extreme climate events like the marine heat wave, coastal upwelling may be providing a kind of refuge that can allow lower trophic level species to persist in high enough abundance that they provide energy for higher trophic level species. So another silver lining of this work is that although forage and low trophic level species are less abundant and tend to be smaller in size due to the effects of climate change, we're seeing that there are some spatial variations and resilience in these systems that give us some hope for the future. Another way that researchers and coastal stewards are seeing the impacts of climate change on our coastal ecosystems is in changes to the diversity of marine species off the coast of California. As I mentioned earlier, the California current ecosystem is populated by a diverse group of fishes, seabirds, invertebrates, and marine mammals. However, from year to year, the composition of species in the region is likely to change as boundaries in the oceans are not fixed. This is not like land where you have a mountain range that necessarily stops you from moving to from point A to point B. The ocean is a reasonably well-mixed place without firm boundaries. Water movement can bring new species from one area to another and exporting local species from one area to another. Changes in environmental conditions like sea surface temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and phytoplankton availability can open up new frontiers for highly mobile species as they make their way from north to south, south to north along the coast, or across the continental shelf, which shows the expanse of our continent into the Pacific Ocean. The 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave, which we've already been talking about, led to some really dramatic and unprecedented changes in the geographic distribution of coastal species. In some amazing and highly publicized work done by some of my colleagues at Bodega Marine Laboratory, including Eric Sanford and Jacqueline Soanes, 67 different species were documented during 2014 to 2016 to have moved out of their typical ranges. So this is a massive shifting of species that is unprecedented and hasn't been recorded in the recent past. Generally, the species that exhibited these shifts were southern warm water affiliated species that moved northward, along with the northward movement of waters from south to north and prolonged high sea surface temperatures that existed throughout the region during that period. You can see some of the species that changed distribution in the images here, including several species of nudibranch, these beautiful little sea slugs, and the short-beaked common dolphin, or the brown booby, and the pelagic red crab, which many of you may be familiar with, having seen them wash up in vast numbers on California beaches over the past few years. So the marine heat waves, like what occurred in 2014 to 2016, have had enormous impacts on the geographical distribution of organisms in the California current. But they also had some really important impacts on the diversity of forage species, the bottom of the food web. And these give us insights into how we might expect climate change to influence species composition of prey species in the California current. So typically in cold years, when there's cold water along our coast, you can see a map here of Central California with the San Francisco Bay shown right here, Monterey Bay a little bit further south. In cold years, there tends to be low species diversity of forage fishes, what we think of as forage fishes. So this is things like anchovy and sardine, herring, Pacific saury. But there tends to be high young groundfish diversity. So this is the high diversity of juvenile rockfishes, which, although eventually they become the things we like to go catch when we have the opportunity to go out and fish along our coast, when they're in their small juvenile stages, they're an important forage species for pretty much everything. So high groundfish diversity, high rockfish diversity, and low forage fish diversity tends to happen in colder years. But in warmer years, we tend to see higher forage fish diversity as warm waters, often moving from the south to the north, bring a new influx of invertebrate and vertebrate forage species to Central California and Northern California. And we see a reduction in the juvenile rockfish diversity. During 2014 to 2015, something really interesting happened. What you can see here is a time series, a history of species diversity of both groundfish biodiversity and forage fish biodiversity from 1990 to 2018. And this is all done by colleagues of mine at the National Marine Fisheries Service, Southwest Fisheries Science Center. In 2015, we see a spike in the biodiversity of both rockfish and forage fish. Now, this is kind of surprising because it goes against what I was just saying. It's a bit predictable that during a warm year, we would have high forage fish diversity, because in most warm years, we have high forage fish diversity. But in this year, we also saw really high juvenile rockfish biodiversity. So the rockfish stuck around. So scientists have kind of been asking, why do we have so much higher biodiversity during this period of enormous climatic disruption? when we might expect only to have higher forage fish biodiversity. What we're starting to think was happening during this period is that not only did we have warm southern water from El Nino type water masses moving northwards into this region of the central California coast, we also still had equatorward transport, waters moving from that Gulf of Alaska region into the central Northern California current region. So we had two different water masses bringing species of two different compositions into our region of the California current, which brought together a wide variety of species. So this is kind of interesting to think about, because when we think about the implications of these findings, we might think that a high diversity of low trophic level species, lots of forage fish, lots of juvenile rockfish might be a good thing. After all, isn't it better if we eat many different kinds of food rather than just one or two? But it's not a great thing if you're a predator that's a specialist, like these Cassin's auklets. Let's think back to the Cassin's auklets. This is a bird that relies almost exclusively on krill and copepods, and it targets those things. It's really good at finding them, and it's really good at eating them when they're there. But if you have really high diversity and you're missing those key critical species like krill and copepods, and those key species are low in abundance, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of other foods. These prey specialists like Cassin's auklets or blue whales is another example, which specialize in just one or two types of food, are not going to fare very well. Another example of when diversity doesn't necessarily help marine predators is when the most nutritious species decline and are replaced by a higher diversity of sort of junk food type species. So sea lion deaths during the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave really increased. And what we think that might have been a cause of this is that sea lions typically rely on higher fat content species that are in high abundance, like anchovy, for instance. And during the heat wave, there was a decline in some of those species, and those species were replaced by a higher diversity of other forage species, like juvenile rockfish, that aren't as high quality food. So even though there's a higher diversity of species available for marine predators to eat, the most nutritious ones might be missing. I've been talking about marine heat waves so far as a way to see into the future for the impacts of climate change on the bottom of the food web. One of the reasons why this is a really great way to get insights into how our particular California current ecosystem is likely to be impacted by climate change is that we expect marine heat waves to become both more intense and more frequent as climate change progresses. What you can see here in the two plots that I'm showing is that on top you see projected intensity of marine heat waves through time, with the most extreme forecasts for climate change and a more moderate forecast for climate change. It doesn't matter if you expect climate change to progress rapidly in the most intense way possible or to take a more moderate pathway, whether it's fast, extreme climate change or moderate climate change, we expect heat waves to become more intense throughout the 21st century into up until 2100. We also expect these kinds of events to become more frequent. And this actually shouldn't really be a surprise to many of your listeners who follow this kind of, who follow these sorts of stories about what's happening in our ocean environment. Since the 2014-2015 marine heat wave, we've had several more heat waves that have continued to impact our coastal environment. So we're already seeing these things become more frequent. And we expect them to continue to do so until the end of the century. One silver lining to the story about I'm kind of going back a little bit here, but one silver lining to the story about high diversity is that as climate change or extreme climate events may impact low forage level or low trophic level species like forage fish by increasing diversity, is that some species like humpback whales might be able to engage in some kind of prey switching, where because there is a greater abundance or a greater diversity of species, if one species isn't available, they can switch to something else. So although these heat waves might become more intense, we expect some species like humpback whales and other predators that are able to be a little bit more flexible in what they eat to do quite well, or at least to not do as badly as specialists. So just to summarize some of the climate impacts on the bottom of the food web that I've been discussing so far, ocean warming and changes in the movement of waters north to south and across the continental shelf have led to some important changes in low trophic level species, including fewer prey, smaller prey, and a different arrangement and diversity of prey than what marine predators like marine mammals, like seabirds, and larger fish like salmon may be accustomed to. But all of this is happening in the background of the other ways that we impact marine systems. So when we think about warming and advection, it's really important to understand the ecological impacts of those climate change related phenomena. But we need to think about how they're connected to the other ways that we use marine systems, whether that's through fishing, shipping, energy exploitation, tourism, infrastructure development, or defense. One highly publicized instance of an intersection between climate, low trophic level species, and other human uses of the oceans is in the recent issue of whale entanglement in Dungeness crab fishing gear. So during the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave, this is again a map of the Central California coast with San Francisco Bay right in the center here from 2013 to 2014, 15, and 16. What you can see is that in a cold year like 2013, in March and May, cool waters persist very close to shore. There's a band of cold water extending from north to south all along the central coast of California. During the marine heat wave, that cold band begins to contract and become closer and closer and closer to shore until in 2016, you can see that the cross-shelf extent of that cold water zone is very narrow compared to a more typical year like 2013, where that cold water band is quite a bit more expanded. The problem with this is that even though we saw an increase in the diversity of some species during the marine heat wave, like anchovy, those species were confined to that small, narrow band along the coast where they could benefit from cold water and hang out in that cold water where nutrient-rich phytoplankton blooms were still occurring. What that meant is that if you're a predator who wants to go after those species, you need to be where they are, right? If you're a whale who goes for anchovies, because that's all that's on the menu in a year that's otherwise very hot, you need to go where the anchovies are. So during 2015 and into 2016, at the bottom here, you can see that humpback whales were closer to shore which is shown by the fact that this point is on the top half of this plot here. They were closer to shore than at any other time in the history of our tracking their position, back to 2001. So humpback whales moved closer to shore to chase their prey. And at the same time, this occurred when, in the same 2 years, 2015 to 2016, we saw a dramatic increase in rates of whale entanglement in fishing gear. And we expect that what's happening is that as whales chased their prey inshore to hang out in that cold, narrow band of water close to the shore, that is exactly where crab pots are found. So it's not necessarily that crab fishermen were doing something that much different, although there were changes in fishing patterns during the same year. It's not that they were doing anything that much different to find Dungeness crabs, but all of a sudden whales were overlapping much more closely with the area that is fished for Dungeness crab than in previous years. Fortunately, there are some really great efforts to address these kind of climate-human forage fish intersections. And one example of that is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's work on the Risk Assessment and Mitigation Program. So this is a program that brought together commercial Dungeness crab fishermen, recreational fishermen, managers, and scientists to try to develop a protocol that would take into account impacts of climate change, like changes in the distribution of prey species that alter the distribution of whales, and then alter the impact or the likelihood of whale entanglements in crab fishing gear. And they've come up with a really excellent multi-step process that takes into account changes in forage availability and asks questions about the risk involved with delaying or not delaying the season based on the amount of forage availability, where we're seeing whales, and the likelihood that whale presence is going to overlap with entanglements. The risk assessment and mitigation program has been successful in the last few years in driving down rates of whale entanglement. And we really think that these kinds of programs that bring together people from a wide variety of backgrounds will be helpful in addressing these intersections between climate, human use, and ecosystem health. Also related to whale entanglement, Ellie Oldak and other colleagues of mine at UC Davis have been working together to review ways that whales die in the California current ecosystem. And part of this is because there has been so much focus on entanglement in the last few years. The RAMP program does a great job at addressing entanglement and its intersection with nutritional stress aggravated by climate change and extreme climate events like the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave. But there are a lot of other ways that we impact high trophic level predator species like whales, including vessel strikes, changes in water quality, changes in disease, often aggravated by climate change, debris like marine plastics, and changes in predation or changes in the ambient noise due to things like vessel traffic or national defense exercises. So there's lots of other ways that we impact marine environments. And the RAMP program begins to address these kinds of intersections, but there is a lot more that we can do. So when we kind of think about what some of the take-home messages are from today's talk, I want you to remember that one of the biggest ways that climate change will likely impact our oceans, including the California current ecosystem, is through food webs. Changes to low trophic level species include changes in abundance, changes in size, and changes in the diversity of the bottom of the food web. And that will have ripple effects throughout the rest of the food web. Fortunately, research is showing that there's a lot of regional variability in these sorts of patterns. So there may be pockets along our coast that exist as refuges from some of the main effects of climate change. And those could be really key in helping to preserve not only low trophic level species during climate change, but also the predators that rely on them. We're also seeing that there are ways in which these species, populations, and ecosystems are resilient and can bounce back quickly from short-term events like the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave. But whether or not that will be true for more prolonged and gradual climate change has yet to be seen. So relying on that resilience to do all the work for us is not going to be enough. We're also seeing that these impacts of climate change on the bottom of the food web are taking place in the background of the other ways that humans are impacting the environment. And while this is upsetting and tragic in some ways, because it makes us feel like, wow, there are so many different ways in which we're damaging our marine ecosystems, it also offers us some hope, because what we're seeing is that as climate impacts these species, they are able to bounce back or have some kind of resilience. And so what we can do to help facilitate that resilience is by reducing some of our impacts at a more local and regional level through things like reducing marine debris or improving water quality that can help to improve the survivability of many marine predators and help them to push through periods of times where they might be experiencing nutritional stress due to climate change. We can also plan our marine environments better, both now, for example, organizing shipping traffic so that it doesn't impact marine mammals like whales quite as much as it does now, or plan future development like offshore wind farms in a way that is smart and doesn't cause additional pressure to these top marine predators. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to me today, and also thank again KGUA and the organizers of today's Ocean Life Symposium. This event, I think, is going to bring a lot of richness and great conversation to our section of the coast, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to be a part of this. If you want to learn about more of the science presented today in my talk, or if you want to get in touch, please feel free to reach out via Twitter or check out my website, helenkilleen.wordpress.com. Thank you again, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you. And you send those questions to oceanlifesymposium@gmail.com. Thank you so much, Helen Killeen and Peggy.
Ellen, that was a great presentation. We thank you very much for helping us on this, wrapping up this first day of our Ocean Life Symposium. Warming from the bottom up, climate impacts at the base of the food web and implications for California marine species. Helen Killeen from just down the road, the Bodega Marine Lab. A lot of information. And one thing we were all noticed was the emphasis on anchovies, because it was salmon season not so long ago, and the salmon fishermen said that the salmon were pinker, they thought, because of the anchovies. You're telling us the whales are happier, they have a lot more food to eat, and with these huge swells, that somehow that also has something to do, I guess, with as you were saying, but we just got hung up on anchovies here. Anyway, I'm talking too much. We need to keep moving along.
Well, we've got a few more minutes, and we can have Scott come in too, and that's Scott Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, and share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, that was incredible. Thank you very much, Helen. I'm glad the stars lined up the way they did so that we were able to have you on here. We go back quite a ways with this original invitation. That was interesting, your data and the years. because we've been seeing less diversity of marine mammals up here, or cetaceans at least, in this area since we began the study in 2014. And also we had noticed the closeness of some of the larger species and even the Risso's dolphins in closer some years. And that's probably the compression you were talking about. And right now we have a tremendous number of pelicans here, and they're feeding in very, very close to shore, which they do, but it's just the sheer number of pelicans that's surprising us how many are right in close here. So you really helped quite a bit with our understanding. And Tree and I learned a lot here from your talk today. It was a lot of info, which we'll be watching again on YouTube to hear more of what you said and go over it again. But I can't thank you enough for persisting with this and catching up to me again like you did.
Well, no worries. And I think, your comments there, Scott, just make me realize that I want to emphasize the value of these coastal stewards and people who make these sorts of observations along the coast. Like you're talking about noticing that the pelicans are closer to shore than in previous years. Or, if you're a fisher person and you go out and you notice that there are changes in the distribution of animals from year to year, those sorts of observations, I think, are really critical, and we're realizing how important they are as we start to notice these broader scale patterns using some of the time series that I've talked about today. So I hope people keep doing that, and the citizen observing projects that were talked about earlier today are really critical in that work.
I was just going to use that exact word, that the citizen scientists are critical because as scientists, you are in laboratories, you have specialized fields, and sometimes you just can't get out to the area. I know there's a walrus counting project that is asking for volunteers to look at walruses through satellites. I looked at some of those pictures of the walruses. I thought, I don't know if I could identify a walrus through a satellite, obviously, but I'm sure a lot of the indigenous people in Alaska and Canada would be good to help for that. So I'm loving how this series is starting out with the combination of scientists and the laboratory work you're doing, the studies you're doing, but also being enhanced by just the eyes of citizen scientists. How do you think the role of citizen scientist is beginning to play out now? Because it's a new term to most of us within the last year or two. What do you think, Helene?
Yeah, well, I think, certainly the role of citizen or community scientists is critical and is growing in importance. For instance, one of the things that we've realized with the risk assessment and mitigation program work to minimize risk to whales of entanglement in crab fishing gear is that we tend to be really data limited. And what I mean by that is that we don't actually know enough about where the whales are to make really good plans about where we should do the fishing. So when we're data limited, that means that we as the scientific community haven't been able to, we can't go out constantly to monitor where every whale is and track them throughout this whole vast California current ecosystem.
And one of our speakers earlier today was Shari Goforth-Eby, who goes out there and photographs and names them. And
exactly.
And Sarah Bogart's coming up either tomorrow or the next day, and we'll find out who's going to be coming up tomorrow from George in just a moment. But we just really want to thank all of our Ocean Life Symposium speakers today, starting with Richard Charter of the Ocean Foundation, Shari Goforth-Eby, and then also Howie Garrett of the Orca Foundation, and now Helen Killeen of UC Davis Coastal and Marine Science. And thank you so much for coming on with us. And George, you're going to give us who's coming up tomorrow.
I have a question for George. I'm sorry. I know I'm springing this on you, Helene. I used to live in Bodega Bay for many, many years. And the one thing I noticed when I moved up here to Mendocino Coast, we didn't see very many whales in Bodega Bay. See them all the time up here. I just wondered if you had, if you knew the reason for that. Are they further out or?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm probably not going to give a great answer. I've only lived on the coast in California in Bodega Bay, so I don't have that reverse comparison. But I will say that one of the things I tried to emphasize today was that the availability of the bottom of the food web changes a lot in space and time. And so we may see that from year to year, the how close whales come to shore or where they tend to be aggregating to chase after their prey changes, because where their prey is changes. Another factor that plays an important role is the coastal bathymetry, which means sort of the shape of the ocean bottom, where there are canyons or bluffs or something like that. That tends to impact where whales tend to congregate as well.
Well, thank you for that quick answer. And we're going to go back to George now, who's going to tell us who's on tomorrow.
And we got a few seconds.
The Ocean Life Symposium is going to continue tomorrow on Tuesday, October 26th at 9 a.m. We'll kick off with Jen Kennedy of the Blue Ocean Society. She'll be speaking on plastics and other debris in the marine environment. At 10 o'clock, it's Bill Keener from the Marine Mammal Center. He'll speak on tales of urban whales. That should be fascinating. Then at 11 o'clock, it's Michael Stocker with the Ocean Conservation Research. He'll be speaking about East and West Coast offshore wind.
And we want to thank so much Scott and Tree Mercer there in the next room over from us. Thank you for bringing this conference to KGUA in Gualala.
And now we're going to return to our regular 12 o'clock show, Monday through Friday. Q with Tom Power from the CBC. Until tomorrow, we'll see you